So exciting. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm Carrie Weber. I'm the Executive Director of the Fairfield University Art Museum, and we are simply delighted to have this evening finally here. Our opening night lecture for the landmark exhibition, In Real Times, Arthur Szyk, Artist and Soldier for Human Rights. It's been a long time coming for us. I would especially like to recognize a few special people who are in the audience with us. I'd like to thank members of the university's Board of Trustees who are joining us. Several descendants of artist Arthur Szyk, I think, are here with us or are on their way. Yay, yay, you made it, yay, fantastic. As well as a number of generous donors to the exhibition. Please consider joining this community of donors who helped to bring this exceptional exhibition to our museum and give today. Your gift will help us to share this exhibition with youth across the state through our outreach programs and will ensure that the museum can continue to bring exceptional exhibitions and programming like tonight's talk that are always free and accessible to all. I know that shortly Philip will be thanking many people who helped to make this exhibition possible. It was a huge group effort, but I would like to personally thank my incredibly talented and hardworking museum team for everything that they did to bring this exhibition, book, and next week's Szyk Symposium to fruition. I also know that Philip will be highlighting some of the fantastic programs we have coming up this fall in conjunction with the exhibition. But I just want to remind you, some of you know, if you cannot join us in person, after tonight, they will all be live streamed via thequicklive.com. You just need to tune in at the right time, and you can watch them from home. They'll also be recorded, so if you're not available at that time, you can watch them at your convenience on the museum's YouTube channel. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Ervin Ungar. Ervin is the world's foremost expert on the art of Arthur Szyk and the tireless force behind the Szyk Renaissance. A former pulpit rabbi fluent in Jewish history and tradition, Ervin is the CEO and founder of Historicana, an antiquarian book firm and small publishing house of Szyk imprints. He has curated and consulted for numerous Szyk exhibitions at major institutions worldwide, including the New York Historical Society, the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, the Deutsche Historische Museum, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and the Library of Congress. Ervin is the author of Arthur Szyk, Soldier in Art, winner of the 2017 National Jewish Book Award, which will be for sale up at the reception, and Justice Illuminated, The Art of Arthur Szyk. His most recent book, Arthur Szyk Preserved Institutional Collections of Original Art, was just published this year. Ervin's memoirs on his life with Arthur Szyk has been accepted by a major university press and will be forthcoming. Please welcome Ervin Ungar.
Thank you, Carrie, and I'm really delighted to be here. Can you hear me okay? It's okay? Yeah, I'm really delighted to be here, and I'm actually honored to be part of the program that you and Philip have. Where's Philip? Raise your hand, Philip. Where are you? Oh, there you are, way over there on the left. And that Philip has have created. As someone who's been championing Arthur Szyk's art for the past 3 decades, and his legacy, I'm really thrilled and filled with deep satisfaction that the two of you have also immersed yourself in this Szyk journey and have joined me and so many others who will be participating in the Szyk program over the next week or two and in the next 3 months. I'm hopeful that 2 short stories, which I want to share with you tonight in honor of this evening, will serve as a fitting introduction to the presentation of Professor Philip Eliasoph. During the last few years, Arthur Szyk has brought Philip and me together, and I cherish him as a colleague and now a dear friend. About in 2000, I curated an exhibition at the Library of Congress, and that was, I'm hitting Philip's program, so I'm advancing it and throwing it off. So excuse me for that, but let me talk while this is being dealt with. But in the year 2000, I won't touch this. I'm going to stand over here, okay? All right? I'll move to the right. Philip's on the left. I'll move over to the right. And in the year 2002, I consulted for an exhibition at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. But I'm not going to give you too many more dates. But in 2005, I traveled an exhibition of the Arthur Szyk Society, a not-for-profit. I traveled an exhibition to Poland, to 3 cities, where I brought Szyk's art and lectured there as well. But on the way to that exhibit, I asked my wife if she wouldn't mind going with me to Berlin for 2 days at most, before we went on to Poland. I had never been there. I'd been to Germany prior to that, and Margie said sure, and so we got on a plane, we went there. But before I went to Germany, I sent off about 30 proposals to different museums in Berlin with the idea of wouldn't it be something if the leading anti-Nazi artist in America during World War II had an exhibition in the heart of Germany in Berlin. I thought that would be something. So I sent off these 30 emails, and I really didn't get any responses. But we went to Berlin, and on day one, Marge and I looked at each other and said, where are we going? And Marge said, why don't we go over to the Deutsches Historisches Museum and go see the IMP building that they had added to their historic Zeughaus, or their historic armory building, which looks like the Metropolitan Museum in the front, in a way. And I said, so we were in Berlin, and I said, yeah, let's go over, because that's a history museum, and I'm into history, so we went over to the museum. And while we were there on day one, I saw a woman outside the museum smoking a cigarette, and I asked her, who's the director of this museum? Could you maybe tell me? And she said, well, his name's Dr. Hans Ottomeyer. Well, it was very late in the day, so we went back the next day. Margie walked into the exhibits, and I decided to go up to the front desk, and I said, is the director or someone from the director's office available? I'd like to speak with him or her. I don't think at the time I said her, but because this was a long time ago, I said, can I speak to him? So what happened is that she said, who are you? And I said, well, I'm Irv Ungar. And she said, well, what do you want? And I said, well, I'd like to talk to somebody there. She said, okay, sit down for 15 minutes. And I waited 15 minutes, but Germans are very punctual, so 15 minutes and 1 second, I went back to the desk again. So I said to her, would you mind maybe calling someone? And she said, okay, sit down. And about a few seconds later, the phone rang at the front desk, and the lady's jaw dropped, and she said, the director of this museum will speak with you. Now, this is the Deutsches Historisches Museum. At the time, there was over 120 museums in Berlin alone, and this is the most prestigious museum in all of Germany. This is the history of Germany for the world, the German Historical Museum on Unter den Linden. It's right in central. So she said, he will speak with you. And I go to myself, holy, you know what? I said, I've got 2 sentences to convince this man to meet with me. And I said these 2 sentences, and he said, come on up, I'll meet with you. And I go up to his office, and this man in his tweed coat, bushy gray hair and a tie, I guess about late 50s, I suppose, maybe 60s, early 60s. And I go up to his office, and I sit there, there's a round table. He's here, I'm here. He says, yes. I said, well, I'd like to show you something, because I never go anywhere without carrying reproductions of Arthur Szyk's art in my bag and so on. So I took this booklet that I had assembled for years, and I put it on the table in front of him. And he goes like this, just like that. He says, this is great art. Who is this artist? I said, well, this is Arthur Szyk. He said to me, has he ever exhibited in America? And I said, no, sir, he never would have, because he was a leading anti-Nazi artist in America during World War II. He would have been exhibited here in Germany and Berlin. He said, just a minute. And then he called somebody in, and this person came in, who turns out, I thought he was the head curator at the time of the museum. I'm talking to the director of the museum. By the way, this director of the museum, he knows all of European history over 500 years, all of Renaissance art up to modern art. This is the man who represents Germany visually to the world. And this other man comes in, he's Hans, and Dr. Ottomeyer, his name's Hans. So Hans is introducing me to Hans, and I'm sitting there, and he says, take a look at this art. And Hans the second looks at it, and he looks back at him, and he says, we should include this art in our next exhibition on Kunst und Propaganda, on art and propaganda. And so I'm 20 minutes, 25 minutes off the street. I'm from California. I'm here, and this German director, he said, then he says, no. We should have an exhibit of your artist by himself. he says to me, and then he says to Hans the second, take this book off the shelf. And he takes a thick book off the shelf, believe me, he puts it right down on the table. And we should do an exhibition catalog in German and English. And we've never done an exhibition, a catalog in English. And then he goes like this. He goes into his pocket, he pulls out something from his pocket like this, and he looks at it, and he goes, it's a pocket calendar. He goes, this is in 2005. And he says to me, 2008, we should have an exhibit of your artist. Can you send me a proposal? Oh, I said, oh, yes, sir. And within 30 days, he wrote back to me, dear Mr. Unger, we will have an exhibition of your artist in the Deutsches Historisches Museum in the IMP building in 500 square meters and 5,000 square feet. And that will open it. And in 2008, I went back to Berlin, and I took Arthur Szyk's daughter, came with me, really elegant woman, and we were there at the opening. And my family came, and other people came, and the opening, it was packed. There was several hundred people, and people in the back, and the cameras were there rolling, and everything was going on. And there were musicians from the Polish embassy who were playing music on the stage of Holocaust that had been created by a Holocaust survivor. And here we are. Arthur Szyk's artwork is in the background. Jews, Jews, Poles, Germans, all of us together. I pinched myself, and I said, all these years as a rabbi, you spend teaching in the classrooms, and people were educating people throughout the universities and in government office buildings, talking about building bridges and all of this. And here I am witnessing this right here in Berlin with this Arthur Szyk. The reception took place, and after that, Dr. Ottermeyer comes up to me. He says, Irv, and this is one of the points I want to make to you about the man, Arthur Szyk. My second story is a lot shorter, and it's about the art. But he says to me, he says, Irv, here I am, a German from Berlin, and here you are, a rabbi from California, and I feel as if we're standing on the same bridge, and that bridge is Arthur Szyk. And that's what he told me. And then I said to Dr. Ottermeyer, why did you meet me in your office? How come you took me? He says, Irv. And I'm thinking, well, I said something about a German, anti-German artist, and maybe that's intriguing. He said to me, well, Irv, to tell you the truth, when that second call came up, my appointment was just canceled. And if you had said that you were from Berlin or you were from Germany or Poland, I never would have met you. But no one has ever walked into my office from California and wanted to show me art. And that's why he met me. And that exhibition, I got I got a binder when that was over. And the binder, this exhibition was in newspapers from Cuba to Korea and Mexico to Madrid. And in Bavaria, they were talking about, and so it had impact. That was Berlin. And this is about Arthur Szyk, the man. Because I've always maintained that behind the great art and the great messages stands Arthur Szyk, the great man. And 3 months later, I went back to Berlin because I wanted to meet with high school kids, German high school kids, interacting with the art. And the German Historical Museum went all out, and they had busloads of kids coming in, and I had a film crew with me because I wanted to film this for a potential documentary in the future. And these kids, some of them were bussed in 3 hours from where it had been formerly East Germany. They'd been up at 6 in the morning, and they were there at 10 for that. And in the exhibition, they were gathered, milling around and doing assignments that the teachers had given them and that the museum had accorded them. And there was a group of them who were standing and were in front of one painting by Arthur Szyk. It's in the exhibit here. And it's actually on the poster as you walk in. It's called either My People or Samson in the Ghetto or The Battle of the Warsaw Ghetto. It has several names. And in it you see resistance fighters who are part of that group of hundreds but thousands who were killed, 7,000 people who were killed, another 42,000 expelled afterwards or taken to camps. And it's called Samson in the Ghetto. Now, keep in mind, Arthur Szyk's mother and brother were murdered and taken to the Chelmno killing center. And I'm standing and looking at that picture, and you'll see it in the gallery. And if you look around the border, Szyk dedicates it to the German people, sons of Cain, be ye damned forever and ever. Amen. And I'm standing with the German high school kids, and I'm reading that inscription to them, and they're looking at this. And I said to them, how does that make you feel? And two of them at the same time said, this does not make us feel guilty, but it does make us feel responsible. Responsible that something like this should never happen again. Now it happens again and again. But does that mean every German high school kid feels that way? No. Every Polish high school kid feels that way? No. Every American high school kid feels that way? No. Every Jewish high school kid feel that way about responsibility? No. But what it means is that art has the power to engage. And that is what this art does. And if you consider that Arthur Szyk used to say, art's not my aim, it's my means. You now begin to understand the man with the great messages, and look at the art too, not just the messages, but look at the art. But that behind the great art and the great messages stands Arthur Szyk, the great man. Thank you.
All right. I would now like to introduce you to Philip Eliasoph, a man who needs really no introduction. But Philip I. Eliasoph, PhD, is a professor of art history and visual culture here at Fairfield University. In a teaching career spanning 6 decades, he has contributed to the university's mission by founding the Fairfield Florence Campus Study Abroad program, the Bennett Lectures in Judaic Studies, the Walsh Art Gallery, which we are proud to now have as part of the Fairfield University Art Museum, the Quick Center's Open Visions Forum, and the Open Minds Institute, among other things, I think. We could add to that list, I'm sure. As of fall 2023, he serves as the Special Assistant to the President for Arts and Culture. Most importantly for all of us here this evening, he is the Exhibition Coordinator for our Arthur Szyk exhibition. Recognized in the field of American art for his pioneering contributions to the study of the Magic Realist movement, his exhibition catalogs, lectures, and curating have widely impacted the fields of social realist art, queer studies, and psychocultural art criticism. His books, catalogs, and journal articles focus on artists with a social realist outlook while championing their undervalued careers. The revival of curatorial interest in artists such as Paul Cadmus, Colleen Browning, Robert Vickery, Adolph Dane, and now Arthur Szyk is largely thanks to his spirited advocacy. His articles have appeared in the American Art Journal, Smithsonian American Art Museum, Art in America, Drawing, and Antiques and Fine Arts. In 1987, he was elected as a working press member of UNESCO's Association Internationale de Critique d'Art. In 2016, he was appointed faculty curator of Visual Arts and Culture for the New York Times In Education Global Learning Platform, and continues his weekly blogs on art history, museum ethics, and gallery reviews for faculty and students around the world. Please join me in welcoming to the stage tonight's main event, Dr. Philip Eliasoph.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to school. Thank you so much, Carrie, for those kind remarks. Indefatigably leading her feisty, tiny, resilient nation, let me begin by quoting Israel's beloved Prime Minister, Golda Meir. I never did anything alone, the former school teacher from Milwaukee explained. Whatever was accomplished in this country was done collectively. And that, my dear friends here, is exactly the spirit of what we've achieved here at Fairfield University in mounting this exhibit about Arthur Szyk. In the same manner that our liberal arts curriculum is driven by our openness to interdisciplinarity, to sharing our resources of mind, and body, and spirit, so many members of our university community jumped into action in helping us to realize this dream of an exhibit, this very prestigious national exhibition here on our campus. Yes, as we know, it takes a village to make a monumental art show, and then we pass the test here at Fairfield with flying colors. First, I want to mention that it was President Mark Nebick who really from the get-go, he really understood the potential of what we were doing. And Mark, thank you, wherever you are, if you're here, thank you for being so supportive. Our provost, Dr. Christine Siegel, and of course the dean of the college, Dr. Richard Greenwald, who's over there. Everyone was so fully appreciative of what we were doing. We were aiming very high. And while we all understood that this was a legacy event, artist, soldier for human rights, all of this was in our wheelhouse. It reflects the highest aspirations of our Ignatian curriculum's demands for social justice. Some of us in the Jewish community know it as Tikkun Olam also. Understanding the universality of Szyk's art and our Jesuit mission here, we are deeply indebted Father Jerry Blaszek, who has written a very profoundly moving contribution to our catalog. And he brings his divine presence with us in almost to our daily work here at school. We've enjoyed exceptional collaboration from nearly every division across our campus. Our advancement team helped to solicit generous donations. Marie-Laure Cougel was just tireless in her pursuit of the requisite funding for this big-ticket item blockbuster show. Jen Anderson's team in marketing, communications, Susan Ciparillo helped out so much with our press and national visibility. Ed Ross in the printing and graphics created a flood of elegantly designed posters and rack cards and heroically putting all this together. Anyone, if you go to Gold's Deli in Westport, you'll see the posters. They love the posters at Gold's. And then we put together very ambitiously this catalog. Here's the catalog, which will be available up at the exhibition, which is really, we're very proud of it, from an incredibly dedicated team here at Fairfield. It's not an easy task to smoothly transition an art show coming from a museum at the greatest public institution of higher education on the face of the earth. The Magnus Collection of Jewish Art and Life at the University of California at Berkeley, to bring that from Berkeley to the gates of 1073 North Benson Road, not a small task. As you will see shortly, we appreciated so much the trust and collegiality of our friends at Berkeley. I cannot possibly convey enough gratitude, as Carrie did, to the Fairfield University Art Museum team, Rosalinda Rodriguez, Megan Pacwa, Dr. Michelle DeMarzo, and of course to Carrie Mack-Weber, to the Frank and Clara Meditz, executive director of our amazingly resourceful art museum. I'd be remiss without mentioning here how the world's leading authority on Arthur Szyk, former Rabbi Irving Unger, has been absolutely unstinting in sharing with me his monumental lifelong knowledge, and along the way he's been so exceedingly generous and has made a significant donation of works and archival materials that are here now at Fairfield University. To our long list of supporters and friends, the Jewish Federation of Fairfield County, Karen Savell jumped right in. At my very first meeting with Karen, she said, "I'm a big Szyk fan, you don't have to convince me." To friends as far away in Israel as the Tadbik Corporation of Israel, to all of them, we say Toda Rabah. Thank you for all that you've done for this great man, this great soldier in art. What I'm going to do now is move forward. I know you've seen some of these slides already, but I have to share with you, this is the first time that I've ever given a lecture that I felt it was necessary to have a warning, because one cannot really talk about this period of the 20th century in any way, kind of gloss over some of the more disturbing aspects. And of course, Szyk dealt with this material straight on. It is, in fact, our colleagues at Berkeley called this show In Real Times. And I hope that in the next few minutes we will be intersecting and interrogating, inquiring, using the methods of art history and culture. As you will see, we'll be looking at heroes and monsters, good versus evil, past and present threats, visual ideas into political protest, and art history's multiple perspectives. Now, In doing so, I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm going to use one of my great inspirations as a mentor, as somebody who, we have great sages and great scholars who sometimes mentor us. But I'll try to tell you a story inspired by Tina Turner. Tina Turner, if you know the song Proud Mary, it starts off in Tina, if you listen to the recording, she says, well, we're going to start this nice and easy, and then we're going to go rough and hard and fast. And I think that, in pacing what we need to do, so let's go forward here. Let's meet Arthur Szyk.
Unique in conception, the paintings of Arthur Szyk carry a political impact as powerful as an atomic bomb. His background encompasses a one-man campaign against the Axis, which started in his native Poland and mounted in intensity after his arrival in the United States in 1940. Since then, his caustic cartoons have become more popular with young America than pin-up girls. His bitter pen satirized the Axis warlords and their self-glorified ambitions, as witnessed by this scathing portrayal of Hermann Goering, Fat Führer of the Luftwaffe. The other side of the picture is represented by these heroic Russians who threw the boastful German hordes out of martyred Stalingrad. A footnote to Szyk's contempt for Hitler is fostered in this demoniacal picturization, while here, a more human leader is portrayed in a biting comparison. The fine artistry revealed in this conception of the Book of Job shows why Szyk has been awarded medals for his illustrations both here and abroad. A keen interest in the life of George Washington led to a series of 38 paintings which were bought by the President of Poland as a gift for the late President Roosevelt. They now hang in Hyde Park, a masterful portrayal dramatized by a master draftsman.
So we'll ask, so who was Arthur Szyk? What did he achieve with incomparable success? Why aren't we more aware of his exceptional role in American art history? I have said the name Arthur Szyk over the past 2-3 years, and well, I think I heard, but why have I never heard of him, Philip? What is it? The great art director, professor and writer Stephen Heller notes. I'm sorry. I'll use Stephen Luckard, Dr. Stephen Luckard, who's the senior curator of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Stephen Luckard wrote, despite this seeming popularity, neither Szyk nor his artwork has yet to receive the scholarly attention they merit. His work has been largely ignored or minimized by art historians, even those specializing in Jewish art and artistic representations of the Holocaust. Arthur Szyk, I would propose, dear ladies and gentlemen, I propose here that I would want you to consider him as the most significant Jewish artist who effectively illuminated and honored the people of Israel and the visual traditions of Judaism. He said, the Jewish artist belongs to the Jewish people. He is the international ambassador. Scattered all over the world, his task is to reveal to the world our great art treasures, to acquaint it with our glorious past as we with our tragic present. April 1944. How did Philip become so engaged in this artist's life and importance? So I'm going to share with you my Megillah. The Megillah is a big story that we read at Purim, my story. And everything about the creation of this exhibit, how it came to be, how it intersected with my own personal interest, my family story, my research interest, my work, here as a curator at Fairfield when we staged an exhibit with the Jewish Museum in New York at the Walsh Art Gallery back in 1993 or 94. All of this seemed to have a comfort or an obvious connection that all of this was, as we say in Yiddish, it's all so, or in Hebrew, beshert. It was all just meant to be. And I hope to share some of that, of my Megillah, with you in this story. So it's to begin with your family, to be personal, my tradition. I always revered the fact and respected that my great-grandfather was the rabbi in Quebec and Montreal, Rabbi Moses Eliasoph. I first was given a paintbrush by my grandmother, my Baba Paula, of blessed memory, Paula Eliasoph, graduate of Pratt Institute, 1913, life member of the American Watercolor Society, life member of the Art Students League, and co-author of a very important catalogue raisonné of the etchings and dry points of Child Hassan. All of this spirit lives within me as I go forward in this project. Philip was also, in the 60s, during the Vietnam War period, I was very engaged in this fusion of art and politics. It all made so much sense. While some of my friends and students in New York and at the colleges were protesting the Vietnam, I somehow ended up in Greenwich Village with the Art Workers Coalition, and we were making puppets, and somehow we thought that using art as a tool was important. The teaching of art history for me has been a study of the fusion of politics, caricature, satire. The word caricature comes from caricare, a kind of burlesque, parody, travesty, meaning a comic or grotesque imitation. Caricature implies ludicrous exaggeration and characteristic features of a subject. Caricatures expose politicians by belittling and humiliating them, using cartoons to deflate their false powers. And you can see, again, there's a thread here. There's a thread, whether I would be teaching Hieronymus Bosch in Canisius Hall, whether I was writing my dissertation and curating the only retrospective in the lifetime of the great American master, Paul Cadmus, or whether I'm, somehow just riffing on R. Crumb and underground comics. All of this, it has a continuity I hope to share with you in this. And you can see it here. Let's look at this painting called The Fleet's Inn, which is in the U.S. Navy History Center, which had been let's say it had been confiscated at the first WPA exhibit in 1934. And I think you look at this frieze, these sort of burlesque caricatures of the sailors in Central Park in 1934 that Mr. Cadmus painted, and then look below at this frieze of Arthur Szyk's painting called Satan Leads the Ball. Sadly, this painting, the location of it is unknown. Now, joining us in this remarkable set of experts and scholars, Donald Cuspit, 88 years old. He will be doing a live stream. He apologizes. He can't be with us. He's too old. He's using a walker. But he will be doing a live stream on October 25. He is considered really the dean of American art critics and art historians. He's greatly revered. And then on October 17 at the Quick Center, we're going to be hosting Art Spiegelman in a joint event of Open Visions, the Fairfield, the museum, and the Bennett Center. So we have echoes of this material coming. Szyk's prolific career spans across Poland, France, England, Canada, and the United States. He is renowned for illustrating themes of the Hebrew Bible, Jewish culture, and ultimately the defense of Europe's Jews, facing Nazi Germany's unprecedented annihilation of the Jewish race, the so-called Jewish race. Using satire as his weapon, he explored World War II, the Holocaust, the creation of the State of Israel, global democracy, and his strong advocacy and involvement in the civil rights struggle in the United States. His works appear in magazine covers and illustrations in Collier's, Esquire, Fortune, Liberty, Look, Time, propelled him into the role as one of the most extraordinary anti-Nazi critics and defenders of human rights, ranked among the greatest illustrators of his time. Let me give you a psychological self-portrait. He paints this remarkable painting in Paris in 1927, The Scribe. And you look at it, and it's clearly there's some self-referential imagery here. Maybe he's taking a little takeoff on the great Holbein painting of Sir Thomas More and the Frick. It's a portrait, but I think it's a psychic self-portrait. And as you look at the painting, you realize that he's reflecting, he's questioning his own identity, and he's purposely mimicking and making fun of himself. What looks like a medieval painting, you realize there's a biplane, an aeroplane floating above this medieval Flemish village. There's a locomotive train going over an old medieval stone bridge. Up in the upper right corner, we have a US dollar bill surrounded by two putai. And then curiously, there's this abstract painting, and it's a picture that references Picasso. And in a way, I mean, this is so deeply troubling that he was in this time thinking of himself as a young artist, and here is Szyk sitting in a cafe, and I call this his psychic cubist self-portrait of his internalized contradictions. He's proudly Jewish and a Polish nationalist. He's a fervent Zionist by now, but expresses universalist, humanist ideas. He's a medievalist, as we'll see, but he's a modernist in his free spirit. His work and style is decidedly anti-avant-gardist, but he's at the cutting edge of 20th century satire and political art. So it's the enigma that we have to work with. One of my most often used illustrations in my own writing is a page from PM newspaper. This was a anti-communist newspaper, New York Daily. It was anti-fascist, anti-communist. It was funded by the multimillionaire Marshall Field. It was a very left-wing newspaper in New York in those days, in the 40s. It challenged conservative, isolationist, anti-labor, anti-civil rights attitudes, and especially spoke against America First isolationism. And if you look very, very carefully at Ad Reinhardt's illustration, How to Look at Modern Art in America, the tree is blossoming, this is 1946, with the new rising, ascending avant-gardist. That the buds at the top of the tree, if you look at the flowers, have the names Pollock, misspelled, Krasner, Lee Krasner, Pollock's Jewish wife, misspelled, Hoffman, Hans Hoffman, Motherwell Rothko, and then look down below. There seems like to be a cemetery with a scarecrow. Let's take a look at the cemetery. And in this cemetery, this graveyard, a cornfield of tombstones of eclipsed, obsolete, hackneyed, 1930s social realist. Look whose tombstones, graves are right next to each other. Paul Cadmus and Arthur Szyk. I think when I showed this to my friend Irv Ungar, I think he nearly plotzed when I showed him this. He couldn't believe it, that Cadmus and Szyk were in the same graveyard of passé artists. So they were, yes, outsiders, marginalized critically for their work. There were, of course, then and today, innate intolerances, homophobia, anti-Semitism, nonconformity, encountering their art and work in real times. This is their real resting places. Mr. Cadmus up at Grove Street Cemetery and Mr. Szyk's grave out at New Montefiore Cemetery in Suffolk. May they rest in peace. Arthur Szyk, a wandering Jew from Łódź in the center of Poland, from a prosperous merchant family who goes to Paris even as a schoolboy. When he was 15, he went to Paris. His parents knew that he was a prodigy. Then after the First World War, and he served in the Polish army, he served as an officer in the propaganda brigade for the Polish army. He went to Paris again, and here he's being trained among some of the top artists, and he establishes his career. By 1930s, with his beautiful wife, Julia, they go to live in London, and while he's working on the important Haggadah. And as we all understand, by 1937, the situation in Europe is becoming intolerable. He's certainly not going to go back to Poland. And so we already have the Nuremberg laws in Germany. And so he will immigrate to the United States with the help of the Polish embassy. He will first arrive in Halifax in July of 1940. Let's bring him across the ocean. And then he arrives in New York in November of 1940. We'll see that he will come to Connecticut, starting to rent beach houses up in Westport's Old Mill Campo area. He will purchase his home, his only home in America, where he will pass away in 1951 in New Canaan, Connecticut. By the time he comes off that ship, the New York tabloid press is already aware, announcing the famed Polish artist who has a price on his head from Berlin. He was already such an antagonist of the Führer that he had already had such a reputation that he was already known as one of the great enemies of the Third Reich. Now, we come to a part of this discussion about Jewish art itself. And this requires an understanding of the 3,000 years of the Israelites and of the Jewish people when we talk about the idea of what is, or how do we categorize Jewish art. Just last Monday, when Jews throughout the world closed the gates of the new year, wishing congregants and friends for good health for the new year as the end of Yom Kippur, at synagogues around the world, the shofar was sounded, dating back to the time of the first temple, Tikia Gedolah, concluding the days of atonement. Now think of this symbolically and metaphorically. The small mouthpiece being the very particular, whereas the open bell is the universality of the sound and the universality. And I would like to transpose that idea to the work of author Szyk. Now this slide, I have to ask your indulgence and for you we all wrestle with this. This is not easy. This is not something one can just absorb, and it has taken me at least 30 or 40 years to work through this. So in the next minute or so, we're going to see a very non-kosher painting. This is the paradox, friends, of Jewish art. Because in Sinai, Moshe arrives with the tablets of the law, and the second commandment clearly makes it prohibited to make any type of realistic, figurative, or narrative imagery. There shall be no idols. There will be no graven images. I have taken groups and students for years to the Jewish Museum in New York City, and we walk through the museum and we look at everything, and suddenly we arrive in front of Solomon Alexander Hart's painting. I love this painting, the Feast of Simchat Torah, the rejoicing of the law, the reading of the end of the Torah, and the cycle, which will happen in a few weeks, at the synagogue in Livorno, Italy. This is in the Jewish Museum in New York. It was painted in 1850. Solomon Alexander Hart was a member of the Royal Academy. He was a great, great Victorian painter, a great painter. This painting has nothing to do with Jewish art, ladies and gentlemen. This painting is a Renaissance painting of figuration. The blasphemy of showing the rabbi holding the Torah scrolls is an abomination to a religious Jew. Now, you have to understand that in terms of the iconophobia of Judaism, the iconophobia. Let's compare. How wonderful when in Rome, and I walk into the church of the mother church of my Jesuit colleagues, the Church of the Gesù, designed by the great masters Della Porta and Vignola, the ceiling fresco completed by Gaudi in 1709. the sumptuous nature of it, the high Baroque hypervisuality of it, literally lifts us off of our feet in its being part of the Counter-Reformation visual program of the Jesuit fathers. Here we're at Norman Jaffe's synagogue out in the Hamptons. Absolute minimalism, stripped of any decor, no images, just the need to think in the abstract. Here's the tomb of St. Ignatius with the largest, heaviest piece of lapis lazuli brought from the mountains of Afghanistan. Gold, plaster, gilded. Some visuality to the extreme of the high Baroque. Corporeal, the body, the physical body of the saints, the body of those to be worshipped. Versus, here's the ark at the Hampton Synagogue, Jewish Center. Look up into the sky and just try to imagine, but you don't have it physically in front of you. But don't believe me. Don't believe me. How about let's go shopping, okay? Let's go to we go to the great the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. You drive, you get there, you can't wait. You go through 3,000 years, no, even before. We go to the pre-Canaanite period, and you go to the gift shop. They're selling kitsch. They're selling trinkets. At best, you get a badly laminated version of Chagall's windows from the Hadassah Hospital. At best, that you end up in your basement anyway after 20 years. I mean, I've seen more Chagall laminated windows. Forget about it. And then we go to the Vatican Museum. The whole world, the whole history of imagery. Michelangelo, Pietà's, Caravaggio paintings, images that make the Western tradition of the visual arts. Well, strangely, ironically, you can't imagine how it took a world war, but after 3,000 years, the moment when Jews and Judaism are at the absolute center of the art world is in New York in the late 40s and early 50s. Now let's remember that Freud writes about, who was an agnostic Jew, but Freud, who says, the Jews, he says, we worship an invisible deity. And this then demands an abstract model of experience. The Jews help to shape modernity. And Freud says, he uses the term, the advanced intellectuality of the Jews. Look at the art that is the reflection of this liberated culture of the Jews of New York. Here is once Marcus Rothkowitz, Mark Rothko, and this is the triumph of non-figurative abstraction. This is the zenith, the absolute golden age, the height when more Jews had an influence in the art world than ever before. And what is it? It's complete nothingness, abstraction. Meanwhile, for those who were good at science and not painting, with less than 3% of the US population, the number of Jews involved in the Manhattan Project was astonishing. I read a review in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago. I can't believe the statistic. 90% of the physicists at Los Alamos were Jews. 90%, that's impossible. The vast majority of them were German, Hungarian, Austrian refugees. Obviously, Oppenheimer and the father of the atomic bomb, Teller and Frisch and Niels Bohr Bloch and Franz Eugene Simon. This was an extraordinary place to be out in the Los Alamos and creating the gadget in the year of 1944. I wonder if they had lox and bagels out there. I don't know. I don't think so. So the critical question then, with that short little tutoring of, was Judaism the raison d'etre of these great master artists? Amedeo Modigliani, that little rascal that Yael's grandmother used to complain about. He was such a rascal, Modi. Chagall did some great windows, but he was known for his pioneering of surrealism. Helen Frankenthaler, Mark Rothko. Was Judaism at the core of their art? No, not really. In fact, the more we understand the New York art world of the 50s, the 40s, the 50s, and I sort of had this was like my mother's milk. I grew up in this world. These artists, here's the great iconic photo of the irascibles, of the founders of the abstract expressionist movement. The women who changed the very nature of modern art. Rothko, Gottlieb, Helen Frankenthaler, she's not in this photo. Lee Krasner is not in the photo. Hedda Stern, she's a great photographer. These Jews were leftist, socialist, existentialist, secularists, Trotskyites, cosmopolitans, universalists. They all had a Yiddishkeit ancestry, but clearly in the reading of the beginning of the avant-garde in New York, Jewish intellectuality permeated the birth of the New York School. Now you can imagine then, not only are the artists themselves these sort of, let's say, secularist Jews, but the two most respected art critics are Clement Greenberg and Harold Rosenberg. Rosenberg is the art critic of the New York Times, of the New Yorker magazine. I remember my first trip to the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford. The Hartford Club, when he came in the late 60s to review an important exhibit of abstract painting at the Wadsworth, the director of the museum said to me, we were so embarrassed because Harold Rosenberg was here to review the show, and because of the anti-Semitism of the Hartford Club, he was not permitted into the club. They had to take him to dinner in a diner. Harold Rosenberg leaves a crowd at the new Jewish Museum, the former Warburg Mansion on Fifth Avenue. The new Albert List building new modernist building was built in 63. In 1966, Harold Rosenberg appears in front of the most elite audience of the New York culturati, and they're all gathered there in the auditorium, very much like today, and he says, well, the title of his lecture was, Is There a Jewish Art? And then Rosenberg says, first they build a Jewish museum, then they ask, is there a Jewish art? Jews. That's the quote. In the last 50 years, Jews have become quite prominent in painting and sculpture, and if Jews produced art, it would seem that there must be Jewish art. On the other hand, it is generally agreed that there is no such thing as a Jewish style in art. The upshot is that while Jews produce art, they don't produce Jewish art. Even Andy Warhol from Pittsburgh is trying to figure out. He does this great series. I love this. I just wanted to share it with you. 10 famous Jews of the 20th century. We don't have any idea what Andy was thinking when he did this, but it's a fascinating idea of what is their Jewishness. Well, I think that it was Norman Kleeblatt at the Jewish Museum in 1996 who hit the nail right on the head in his exhibit called Too Jewish. For the art critics and the art world, the tastemakers, Szyk's art was totally dismissed. It was simply too Jewish. Author Szyk, I am resolved to serve my people with all my art, with all my talent, with all my knowledge. He was a Jewish artist. And I propose perhaps the greatest Jewish artist of the 20th century. Now, method, technique, training, all of that is part of what he does. He's trained at the Académie Julian in Paris. He adopts a kind of medieval style of illustration. He loves the idea of the illuminated manuscript. As you can see, we're looking here in the top left at a very early example of a manuscript from the 15th century of Purim. The first time people were wearing costumes is shown in this great manuscript in the Vatican Museum. And here's Szyk in the lower right, starting or working on the great Szyk Haggadah from London. And the Szyk Haggadah is one of the highlights of any religious or sacred book creation in the modern world. When it was produced, and finally after years working on this through the 1930s, the Times of London, when this book was published in 1940, the Times of London said, it is arguably the most precious book ever published in the English language. It was produced and in an edition of 250 copies. The original sold for $500. That was the price of an automobile in 1940. You could buy a car or you could buy one of these books, one of the Szyk Haggadahs. The strategy that Szyk uses is that he's going to subconsciously use the idea of Jewish history and Jewish heroes, and I feel that, and my students of course have had to endure my lessons about how the Jungian archetypes become the transit point for how to take these images and translate them into meaningful figures so that are universally understood. And so here's Szyk. I'm not sure he's aware that he's adapting this strategy, but what he does is he'll take an idea. Here we are, this wonderful manuscript of the Saint Martin d'Aragon, and it's a Rothschild manuscript, a beautiful manuscript of the early 15th century, and he translates that into an image of the valiant crusader Simon Bar Kokhba of the Bar Kokhba revolt in 1927. He's literally going to redo Jewish history using these archetypes. He says famously, "Art is my weapon." Szyk fulfills a kind of Jungian Joseph Campbell heroic destiny, adapting the idea of the heroic archetype. He cast himself as the Jewish soldier in art. And obviously, by the 1930s, with the rise of the tyrants and dictators in Europe, he begins to understand that he's going to have to transfer from the very fine, very elegant book making and illustrations he was doing in the 20s, and he has to take on the uniform, and he uses this idea, well, he will adapt, begin resisting Nazi aggression. He starts to use the idea of the Jews as the modern Maccabees in his images of fighting against dictators. This is a very prescient drawing. 1933, Adolf Hitler had just been appointed chancellor in the Reichstag. 1933, this drawing is dated. And already he realizes that he has a menacing figure leading the German government. He shows Hitler as Pharaoh. And he understands that already because of the publications of Mein Kampf, and already because of the SS and the stormtroopers that are helping to bring Hitler to power, he already realizes this is so early, 33. And the Passover story becomes then the leitmotif of the liberation story, this marvelous, marvelous illustration. As early as 1934, as this is part of the compilation of the pages that will end up in the Szyk Haggadah, the story of the exodus from slavery, freedom, slavery, these become the undercarriage of Szyk's art. He will continue in using, with versatility, archetypal heroes, Jewish Maccabees as freedom fighters, fighting against the Egyptians, or he translated his great love of the American Revolution, the struggle of Concord, more heroes, and the same kind of resiliency, showing young Israeli male and female soldiers winning the 1948 war for independence. The calm before the storm, 1940. 1940. The Democrat versus the dictator. And where was America? Where was the American population in 1940? Pretty much stay out for my sake as well as our own. No Americans are going to go to be involved in that mad Europe. By 1940, 9 concentration camps had already been built. By 1940, we already had the Nuremberg laws. By 1940, we already had Kristallnacht, and the open war against the Jews had clearly been there. By 1940, Poland had already been invaded. This is a powerful image that Szyk painted in 1942, Hitler as the Antichrist. Look in the hair, look in that black hair. It says, Vae Victus, woe to the vanquished. And his eyes are, in his pupils, are the skull, the Totenkopf of the SS, death. Now, it was picked up for the New York Times in 1945 at the end of the war. But again, Szyk is prescient. He's already aware of what is about to come. He understands the evil that is coming. The Gallup poll in September 1939, 84% of the American public totally non-interventionist. No one wants to send troops to help to defend Europe, Poland. It's absolutely out of the question. And then soon thereafter, by 1940, we know that France, Holland, Belgium, and England is under attack in the Blitz. So we ask the question, in this non-interventionist American public, it can't happen here. What will happen when America has a dictator? In the way Philip Roth ruminated in his great book, The Plot Against America. The American people say no. And in editorial cartoons, we see not just isolationism, but ugly images of anti-Semitism. Believe it or not, there is a Jewish emergency. Jews are the cause of high taxes, slavery, starvation, death. President Rosenfeld, not Roosevelt, Rosenfeld, states that no Gentile would dare to stop us. And note the very crude cartoons of the brain trust of Roosevelt's cabinet and Justice Bernard Baruch, Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau, Benjamin Cohn. This is where the American public was. Szyk does this drawing that is published in the American Mercury. It's dated November 1941. A madman's dream. Statue of Liberty. Statue of Liberty with the face of Adolf Hitler and with a swastika in the lamp of freedom. And let's look carefully at the base. Look carefully now at the base of the Statue of Liberty. Let me show you. There, with his golden hair, America's iconic hero of the boy from Minnesota, Charles Lindbergh, Lucky Lindy, who is really the spokesperson for the America First movement. Lindbergh has a swastika armband on his left arm. And in the lower right, sitting there playing with a little toy plane, is Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, who is awarding Charles Lindbergh the Reich Service Cross, 1938. Our dear colleague, Dr. Gabriel Rosenfeld, who'll be speaking next week at our symposium and who's currently the president of the Center for Jewish History in New York. His book, which just came in my mailbox 3 days ago, Fascism in America, Past and Present, with Janet Ward. This image of the Statue of Liberty being used as what would happen, this is counterfactual history. What if? What if? Well, we only have to go up to Southbury, to our good friends up to Southbury, Connecticut, because in 1937, property was purchased to create the General von Steuben camp for training Nazi youth. And the good citizens of Southbury resisted this. They protested, they picketed, and thanks to the good intervention of Reverend Manley of the Southbury Federated Church, They said, we will not have this insidious menace of Nazism here in our town of Southbury, Connecticut. You know, I remember going to Madison Square Garden, even before the new one that down by Penn Station. You know, I go to see basketball games and the old NIT tournament and go to see Ranger games. You know, Madison Square Garden's a pretty great place. Well, it was a place like this that Americans, America First people, held a mass demonstration on February 20th, 1939, a mass demonstration for true Americanism. George Washington's birthday. 22,000 Nazis hold a rally in the garden. February 20, 1939, with displaying 30-foot-tall images of George Washington. This is not in Berlin. This isn't the sports plots. This isn't in Munich. This is Madison Square Garden. Join us for the live stream on Wednesday, November 1st, when Arnie Bernstein will be speaking to us from Chicago about his book, Fritz Kuhn and the Rise and Fall of the German-American Bund, Swastika Nation. And let's not forget courageous women. Dorothy Thompson, who was the wife of novelist Sinclair Lewis. She started heckling these Nazis, and she was escorted out by Bund stormtroopers at the point when Fritz Kuhn, the American Führer, said, "The Aryan race follows the golden rule, while the Jews only follow the rule of gold." So what shapes, then, the popular culture of America in assessing beliefs, values, political viewpoints? What is shaping its popular culture? So we have to do a deep dive into American popular culture. And guess what? It was not through editorials in the New York Times or the Los Angeles or the Chicago Tribune. It was through cartoonists like Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, both Jewish. Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel in Cleveland. These cartoonists were symbolically creating superheroes in cloaked, disguised identities to smash Nazi fascism, addressing isolationist, apathetic American public. Between 1941 and 44, comic book sales doubled from 10 to 20 million copies in circulation. This meant that this was the way. Before television, before mass media, this was the way to give a sense of the menace that was happening from the streets of New York or Boston to the farms of Iowa and Nebraska. And so the comic books become one of the great propaganda sources for fighting the Axis. Here is Szyk's commercial illustration done for the John Wyeth pharmaceutical company in 1942, Fool the Axis, use prophylaxis. And if you look, I love the detail on Mussolini, gonorrhea, it says on his sash, gonorrhea. I love that. Brilliant use of caricature. Imagine, it's 1940. Siegel and Shuster have an edition of Superman. And here are these two Jewish guys from Cleveland. Well, they want to arrest Hitler and Stalin, bring them before the World Court in Geneva for their crimes. This is 1940. It's extraordinary. Again, the comic books have the knowledge. And we're going to enjoy a lecture by Dr. Deborah Varat, University of Southern New Hampshire. She'll be speaking to us on October 19. She's done some great work about the Captain America series, and she's really given us a whole insight into what was going on in this comic world. World War II was an age where where we come to the distillation of the great age of the propaganda poster and propaganda itself. What do we mean when we're talking about propaganda? Well, the propaganda machine itself is something that we have to appreciate of when we say, how did Hitler do this? How did he succeed? If we look at the triangle of what is propaganda, in a sense, you use the Greek words ethos, pathos, and logos. Propaganda has to be tested for its credibility. It exaggerates your emotions, and it defies logic. And ladies and gentlemen, we know that we are besieged with fake news today, and we'll see what happens in the election of 2024. Joining us for our symposium will be Dr. Looker, the senior curator of the Holocaust Museum, and his book called State of Deception, The Power of Nazi Propaganda is a brilliant study. I use it in my class. He also was the main author of The Art and Politics of Arthur Szyk. Szyk is quoted in the New York Post in 1944. The origin of all art is what we call propaganda. I do not say that art is my aim. Art is my means. And then it happens. The day of infamy. What Szyk was warning the American public would come to be 5, 6 a.m. over Pearl Harbor, 350 aircraft destroying the American fleet sitting at Pearl. The next day, the United States declares war. Szyk, as a Pole, in 1939, creates this powerful image, Poland, the Christ of nations. Thomas Hart Benton, one of America's great WPA social realist artists, working for the Office of War Information, creates this powerful, riveting image. 1941, the year of peril. Civilization itself is on the cross, is being crucified. What will the Allies do to face this heinous enemy? Joining us on October 5, Dr. Wendy Lauer, who grew up in Southport, Connecticut, who's a very renowned scholar in Holocaust studies. She teaches at Claremont McKenna. She was a National Book Award finalist. She'll share with us her in-depth work on the life of Arthur Szyk in Poland. The industrialized mass murder machine is unleashed. Her book, The Ravine, is a study of just one massacre that she unravels. Now, propaganda is important in order to motivate and to raise an army. So here we are at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City for the National War Poster Competition. And here we see what I call the uses and abuses of propaganda for the good, the bad, and the ugly. Some propaganda, especially in the hands of the Szyk ops group, will be proposing desertion, sabotage, preying upon homesick Allied soldiers separated from their families and relations. What are you doing here? You should desert. Your boyfriend or your girlfriend back at home is being left with some Gadsby. And so it comes. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. And so it arrives. Szyk's memorable cover, maybe his most iconic cover for the Collier's magazine, was drawn in New York City. It says Arthur Szyk, New York, September 1941. It was published as the cover on January 17, 1942, some 5 weeks after Pearl Harbor. But clearly he is auguring, warning us of a global struggle against totalitarianism, of Hitler's unremitting desire to rule the world, to create the next empire. Now, there is a moment in art history where you think about how artists, and Picasso has this great, we say all great artists end up stealing from each other. And I like this very much in that if you look carefully in the image here, look at the serpent coming out of the bottom of the globe. Quotes from Dante, abandon all hope, ye who enter here. And then you see this vicious, poisonous serpent coming out with swastikas on its skin. This great Vermeer painting, the allegory of the Catholic faith, was acquired by the Metropolitan Museum in 1932. And I'm certain, if I'd been with Arthur Szyk during his first or second visits to the old Met, that he went upstairs and he looked at this painting. Now, this is a fascinating Vermeer, the master from Delft at this time. He was actually being tutored by Jesuit mentors at this time. He had at this time, we think he almost converted to Catholicism. And so what you see is this female allegorical figure, she's stepping on a world, and crushed is the serpent, which would be, we would understand, in this case, maybe Protestantism. It's an allegory of the religious wars of Europe of the 17th century. But Szyk will adapt that also in his language. Another powerful cover, November 1, 1941. And I use as an art historical reference Caravaggio's great painting of the card sharps out at the Kimball. What do we have here? We have duplicity, deception, dishonesty. And what is happening at this table? How does he simplify? How does he bring us into the problem of the war? A German general is sitting there as a skeleton, looking at our newly acquired Russian ally, Ivan, now that the Russians have been invaded, Operation Barbarossa. And here we see Hitler's holding, exasperated in his hand, he has 2 aces is better than 3 of Hitler's 3 jokers and kings. Hitler is holding in his hand the jokers, Emperor Hirohito, Mussolini, and Vichy's Marshal Pétain. Ivan, our new ally, after the breaking of the non-aggression treaty, is holding the USA and Britain as his allies. So who is going to win this game of death? Who's going to win? When I began studying Arthur Szyk, of course, there hasn't been one year, particularly around Thanksgiving time, that I always send my students home for Thanksgiving break, and we talk about Rockwell's memorable images of the 4 Freedoms posters. How extraordinary that those posters that were executed by Rockwell in 1943, how extraordinary. Compare them with Arthur Szyk's posters, which were completed in 1942, a year earlier. This is, of course, generated by FDR's famous State of the Union speech of January 6, articulating in the State of the Union speech the 4 freedoms. Szyk was actually a year ahead in this iconographic storytelling. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, freedom from fear. This is an American creed. Ben Hecht, Broadway playwright, producer, writer of many plays and Hollywood productions. Ben Hecht wrote the Ballad of the Doomed Jews. This appeared as a full-page ad in the New York Times. 4 million Jews waiting for death. Oh, hang and burn, but quiet Jews, don't be bothersome. Save your breath. The world is busy with other news. And let's look in detail. Here is the page from the New York Times without Szyk's art. The editors, and there were circles in the New York world that thought it would have been too gruesome to actually show Szyk's illustrations of Jews being slaughtered. But this is an ad. I want everyone to note the date, September 14, 1943. I hope you watched Ken Burns' series on the U.S. and the Holocaust. Did the State Department know? Yes. Did the Pentagon know? Yes. Of course, everyone knew at this point. Dr. Seuss. Out of Dartmouth College, Dr. Seuss, who was absolutely a comrade in arms and a good friend of Szyk. They worked together at PM Magazine. Here's Theodore Geisel's illustration, July 20, 1942. Only God can make a tree to furnish sport for you and me, with Jews hanging from the trees like Christmas stockings. Dr. Seuss. And we'll be joined by Art Spiegelman on October 17 as he will retell the story of his parents' survival from Auschwitz in his Pulitzer Prize-winning Mouse series. Join us for that on October 17. Szyk was totally committed to the idea of human rights. He was totally committed to fighting against racism and prejudice and bigotry, discrimination of all. He knew that if it could happen to the Jews, it could happen to anyone. And so in his understanding of once he becomes, and he's in America, he understands the problem of our black brothers and sisters in America. Here's a drawing, a cartoon he did in 1944. The 2 American GIs have captured 4 German soldiers. The white GI says, "What would you do with Hitler?" Speaks to his colleague, his brother in arms. The black soldier says, "I would have him made a Negro and drop him somewhere in the USA." And now, of course, in the same way of anti-Semitism, racism, thanks to Morgan Freeman, we're going to have a great new film made about racial segregation of the U.S. Armed Forces, fighting Jim Crow, and the brave men of the 761, the Black Panther division, the original Black Panthers, that tank battalion that fought with great honor, won many Purple Hearts and many, many sacrifices to come back to the States and have to live in the degradation and segregation of living in the States after they had fought Nazism. It's hard for us to imagine. Join us again with the Quick Center sponsoring an event in collaboration with our great friends with Glenn Diner and the Bennett Center. Circle the date, November 14, when Dr. Susanna Heschel, the daughter of the great, blessed Abraham Joshua Heschel, who stood arm in arm with Dr. King in our shared legacies, the African American Jewish Civil Rights Alliance. We'll be talking about that alliance also. Come to that event. Eleanor Roosevelt had a personal affection for Szyk. The only artwork in our exhibit that our colleagues at Berkeley allowed us to add is this drawing, which you will see when you walk into the gallery in a few minutes. And on the left, you're going to see a tiny little drawing done in 1944 when FDR was still alive. He gave it to Eleanor Roosevelt, to Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt, from Arthur Szyk, your soldier in art. She wrote in her column, "My Day, I know of no other miniaturist doing quite this kind of work. In its way, it fights the war against Hitlerism as truly as any of us who cannot actually be on the fighting front today." January 8, 1943. Arthur Szyk and Eleanor Roosevelt. And let's come to Connecticut. Connecticut, his last home. Well, Szyk was the life of the party. When Irv tells me about him and reads his letters, they were partying, they loved music and dance, and they were really, sort of a very festive couple. And from the New York theater crowd, they learned, you got to go to Westport, Connecticut. That's the place to go. You want to rent your summer cottage down at the old mill down by Campo Beach. But we have to remember that some towns in Connecticut were not so welcoming to the Jews until 1968, and in many, many towns around us, there were these real estate covenants. These premises cannot be transferred or leased or sold to any persons of the African, Negro, Japanese, Chinese, Jewish, or Hebrew races. Ladies and gentlemen, there are communities surrounding this university that had racial restrictions and covenants within 3 minutes of this campus. Laura Keene Zemenkin Hobson writes a bestseller that just shocks the American public. She writes this book called Gentleman's Agreement, the runaway bestseller of 1947. It also is quickly converted into a film. Eli Kazan directs it. It's the first film in Hollywood in which the word Jew is used, 1947. The word Jew had never been used in a Hollywood film. And it's about life in Connecticut towns like Darien. And there's a great quote in Gentleman's Agreement, and New Canaan's even stricter about the Jews than Darien. Szyk buys a house in New Canaan. And he creates this magnificent Declaration of Independence, which is now in the Library of Congress, and he dedicates it on the 4th of July, 1950, to the people of New Canaan. He dedicates this magnificent document. He also creates the Proclamation of the State of Israel in 1948. This was made in New Canaan, Connecticut, and you go to homes you go to Tel Aviv and Haifa, and you see these in people's homes. It was created here in New Canaan. In fact, details of kibbutzniks and Haganah fighters. In fact, the very first State of Israel bond, dated 1951, look carefully, in Hebrew and in English, is the signature of Chaim Weizmann, Dr. Weizmann, David Ben-Gurion, and the artwork is by author Szyk. Szyk's name becomes associated with the Red Scare, the blacklisting. He is listed 9 times as a member of subversive and communist-sponsored groups. This, of course, is completely heartbreaking to him. And like the ruin of J. Robert Oppenheimer, he is cited in the House of Un-American Activities report of the Congress of April 1949 for being part of this subversive group. These were scientists and humanitarians that were very concerned about that the world was going to blow up with unrestricted nuclear arms. These communists, so-called communists, were seeking racial desegregation, national health insurance, nuclear conciliation with the USSR, and the signers were Albert Einstein, Howard Fast, Norman Mailer, Arthur Miller, J. Robert Oppenheimer, Dorothy Parker, Ben Shawn, Studs Terkel, and Arthur Szyk. Ladies and gentlemen, by the end of World War II, millions of Nazis were killed. But Nazism is alive and well today. Yesterday, Karen Savell told us that in the state of Connecticut, the incidents of anti-Semitism have risen by 100% recently, in the last year. 100%. So we're not done with this plague. Staggering spikes of statistics of hate crimes. 60% of the religious hate crimes in the United States are aggressive crimes against Jews. And so this, as a teacher, as a faculty member, this is the legacy to teach our children, not only to never forget, but understand what racism, what intolerance, and why we have to promote camaraderie, kinship, brotherhood with all races, religions, whether race, gender, sexual orientation. This is not what Jews or anyone, this is what we teach here at our school. We're just 75 years since the gas chambers, this billboard says, and a billboard calling out Jewish hate isn't an overreaction. Well, everybody, it was time to move on. The war was over. People had been burned to death at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The piles of corpses were in the death camps. And so there was this feeling after 1945 of it was time to put this all behind us, time to move on. So why haven't we heard the name of Arthur Szyk, as I asked earlier? Well, he chose a higher calling. Although world famous, Szyk was a very respected illustrator and fine artist of most beautifully printed books, publications in the 20s and early 30s. It was the rise of Nazism that he had to drop everything. He gave everything away. He took on the uniform as an artist, a dissident, to become the soldier in art. He was a one-man anti-fascist propaganda outlet. Number 2, he had a unique personal context. Sure, we had great World War II art by N.C. Wyeth, by Benton, by Rockwell, but only Szyk had skin in the game. His beloved mother, Eugenia, and his brother Bernard were murdered. gassed to death. Now it's time to forget the war horrors. In the abyss post-Auschwitz and the atomic era, the national sentiment was, let's move on. We need to bury these images of horror. Szyk's memories, images of destruction, mass death were overlooked when he died his untimely death in 1951 at age 57 of a massive heart attack. His wife would say that she always felt that it was the humiliation as a proud American of being named as in the House of Un-American Activities as a communist. Let's remember that the Diary of Anne Frank was accidentally discovered in 52. Lillian Hellman puts on the play at the Court Theater in 1955. The word Holocaust does not enter the Library of Congress until 1968. Art styles progress and change. There was a total rejection of these old, corny, hackneyed American social realists of the 30s. That was the 30s. That was war propaganda. It was even considered kitsch. It was the triumph of the New York School, the birth of abstraction that was the transformative new art that brought America and New York to the center of the art world. His art style was eclipsed. And finally, his work was just too Jewish. The leading figures of the abstract school, they were secular atheists, socialists, as I said, and that many actively hid their Jewish Hebraic family roots. I've worked on a major biography of a major American artist, and by total accident, when I asked for his birth certificate from a town in Massachusetts, I realized only then that he was Jewish. No one knows that this artist was Jewish. So reputationally, Szyk slipped off the radar screen of America's art historical masters, but his legacy shines brightly today. And this just in. Last December 31st in the New York Post, we learned that the Forest Hills Synagogue, the congregation has diminished, population demographic of Forest Hills has changed, and so they're selling the synagogue. But what are they going to do with a 32-foot gold and bronze magnificent ark? Well, the future of that will be discussed by Dr. Sam Gruber about saving the ark at the symposium. When I think of Szyk, I think of a man like Lincoln, a man who, as Julia Ward Howe, he has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth goes marching on. And this is for us here at Fairfield. These are our mission and our values. How we're, through art, through our museum work, through our visual arts and culture work. This is what we believe in also. Dr. Nemec often reminds us of our motto, perfidum ad plenum veritatem. The truth will make you free through faith to the fullness of truth. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. Thank you. Thank you. You can bring the lights up. Let's bring the lights up. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you. Thank you. Let's get up to the exhibit. Thank you. Thank you. There's a great reception, great food and drink, and the remarkable art of Arthur Szyk up at the museum. There are shuttles to help you get up, a short walk up the hill. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you at the exhibit up the hill. Thank you. Hi. Thank you. Oh.
Szyk's daughter, Mosley, is friends with Mary.
Lives in Litchfield. That's